The board has reviewed your concerns and has determined they don't warrant further investigation at this time. That's what the email from Gerald Thompson, chairman of the board at Horizon Financial Services, said in response to my detailed whistleblower report about suspected securities fraud, sent with the corporate formality of someone who believed that dismissing employee concerns with polite language made serious allegations disappear. Don't warrant further investigation at this time. I'd been senior compliance analyst at Horizon Financial for 8 years, monitoring trading activities and regulatory compliance for our wealth management division that managed $4.2 billion in client assets across institutional and high-net-worth individual accounts, ensuring every transaction followed SEC regulations and every client communication met disclosure requirements so that our advisors operated legally and our clients' interests were protected. But according to Gerald and the board, my 47-page documented analysis of trading patterns that appeared to constitute illegal front-running and insider trading didn't warrant investigation because the trades in question had been executed by Marcus Sterling, Horizon Star portfolio manager who generated exceptional returns for 5 consecutive years and who was personally responsible for attracting over $800 million in new client assets. I'm Elena Rodriguez, and I sat at my desk at Horizon Financial reading the board's dismissal of my whistleblower report while knowing exactly which securities laws were being violated and exactly what would happen when federal regulators eventually discovered that a wealth management firm had received detailed internal warnings about fraud and had chosen to ignore them because the person committing the fraud was too profitable to investigate. 8 years, 3 months, and 9 days of monitoring trading compliance, building surveillance systems that detected suspicious patterns, and investigating potential violations to protect both clients and the firm from regulatory enforcement, and Gerald Thompson had decided that my documented evidence of illegal trading wasn't worth investigating because it would be disruptive to business operations, to question Marcus Sterling's trading practices. I wasn't the portfolio manager who made investment decisions or the executive who set firm strategy. I drove a 2019 Mazda 3 with 76,000 miles on it and copies of SEC regulations in my center console because I reviewed securities law updates during my lunch breaks at nearby parks when other people scrolled social media. I lived in a condo in Stamford, Connecticut, with a home office containing binders full of trading surveillance reports, compliance investigation files, and SEC enforcement actions that I'd studied to understand how regulatory violations occurred and how agencies detected them. My desk had 3 monitors displaying real-time trading data, compliance alerts, and pattern recognition software that I'd helped develop to identify potential violations before they became serious problems. I was analytical, methodical about compliance monitoring, protective of both client interests and regulatory obligations, and apparently creating inconvenient problems for a board that didn't want to discover that their most profitable portfolio manager was committing federal crimes. The trouble had started 9 months earlier when I'd begun noticing unusual patterns in trading activity by Marcus Sterling's accounts. Marcus managed approximately $600 million in client assets across 23 institutional accounts and 37 high-net-worth individual accounts. He'd built a reputation for consistently outperforming market benchmarks and for having uncanny timing on major trades, buying stocks just before positive earnings announcements, selling positions just before negative news broke, and generally seeming to be positioned perfectly ahead of market-moving events. In the wealth management industry, consistently. Exceptional performance often triggers compliance scrutiny because it can indicate either extraordinary skill or illegal information advantages. My job was to monitor for the latter while hoping for the former. In June 2023, I'd run a routine analysis of Marcus's trading patterns over the previous 18 months and had noticed something concerning. Marcus's accounts had executed unusually well-timed trades in advance of 17 major corporate announcements, mergers, acquisitions, earnings surprises, FDA approvals, and regulatory decisions, across different industries and companies. Individually, each trade could be explained as good research or fortunate timing. But 17 instances of buying stock in companies 2 to 4 weeks before major positive announcements, or selling stock 2 to 4 weeks before major negative announcements, started to look less like skill and more like advanced knowledge of material non-public information. This pattern suggested potential insider trading. I'd begun a deeper investigation in July 2023. I'd reviewed trading records, examined the timing of trades relative to public announcements, analyzed Marcus's documented research and justifications for the trades, and looked for any connections between Marcus and the companies where he'd demonstrated such perfect timing. The investigation revealed several concerning findings. First, Marcus's pre-announcement trades had been concentrated in companies where Horizon had other business relationships. Horizon provided investment banking services to some of these companies, handled retirement plans for others, and had lending relationships with several more. This meant Horizon's other divisions potentially had access to material non-public information about these companies through legitimate business relationships. Second, Marcus's trade timing was statistically improbable. I'd run the numbers. The likelihood of correctly timing 17 major announcements through research and analysis alone was extremely low, approximately 0.0003% if each trade had a 50-50 chance of being well-timed. This level of consistency suggested Marcus had some information advantage beyond public research. Third, I'd identified a pattern of communication between Marcus and several Horizon investment bankers who worked with the same companies where Marcus had made his well-timed trades. The communications were via personal email accounts and text messages rather than Horizon's monitored business communications systems, which suggested deliberate avoidance of compliance monitoring. By August 2023, I'd compiled enough evidence to believe that Marcus Sterling was likely engaging in insider trading, obtaining material non-public information about companies from Horizon's investment banking division and using that information to trade in client accounts before the information became public. This was a serious violation of securities law that could result in criminal charges, civil penalties, and regulatory sanctions against both Marcus personally and Horizon as a firm. On September 8, 2023, I'd submitted a formal whistleblower report to Horizon's Chief Compliance Officer, David Mitchell. The report was 47 pages long and included detailed analysis of trading patterns, timeline correlations between trades and announcements, communication records suggesting information sharing, and statistical analysis showing the improbability of Marcus's consistent timing. The report concluded that Marcus's trading patterns warranted immediate investigation and potential reporting to the SEC. David had read the report and had called me into his office the next day. "Elena, this is serious stuff. If Marcus is actually trading on inside information, that's criminal activity and the firm could be liable for not preventing it. But you understand what investigating Marcus would mean. He's our top portfolio manager, he's responsible for a huge portion of our revenue, and if we investigate him and it turns out to be nothing, we've damaged our relationship with someone who's critical to the business." I'd responded that compliance obligations didn't have exceptions for profitable employees, and that if there was evidence of potential securities fraud, we were legally required to investigate regardless of business implications. David had agreed in principle but had said he needed to discuss with executive leadership before launching a formal investigation that would require interviewing Marcus, reviewing his communications, and potentially restricting his trading while the investigation proceeded. On September 22, David had told me that executive leadership wanted to brief the board before proceeding with any investigation of Marcus. The concern was that investigating a star performer without board awareness could create issues if the investigation found nothing wrong and Marcus subsequently left the firm due to feeling unjustly scrutinized. A board briefing was scheduled for October 5. On October 5, I'd been asked to present my findings to Horizon's board of directors in an executive session. Present were the 7 board members including Chairman Gerald Thompson, CEO Richard Hoffman, CFO Amanda Chen, General Counsel Paul Martinez, and Chief Compliance Officer David Mitchell. I presented for 45 minutes, walking through the trading patterns, the statistical improbability of Marcus's timing, the communication patterns suggesting information sharing, and the regulatory framework that made insider trading a serious federal crime. I'd concluded by recommending immediate formal investigation, potential suspension of Marcus's trading authority pending investigation results, and consideration of voluntary disclosure to SEC if the investigation confirmed violations. The board's questions had been revealing. Rather than asking about the evidence or investigation methodology, they'd focused on business implications. Gerald Thompson had asked, if we investigate Marcus and word gets out, how many clients might we lose? Amanda Chen had asked, what's the financial impact if we suspend Marcus's trading during an investigation? Richard Hoffman had asked, is there any way to interpret these patterns as legitimate research and good timing rather than insider trading? Only one board member, Patricia Nguyen, had asked substantive questions about the evidence. Have you reviewed whether Horizon's information barriers between investment banking and wealth management are adequate? If Marcus was obtaining inside information, how was he getting access to it? I'd explained that information barriers appeared inadequate and that communications through personal accounts suggested deliberate circumvention of compliance controls. The board had dismissed me from the executive session to deliberate privately. On October 12, 7 days after my presentation, I'd received Gerald Thompson's email stating that the board had determined my concerns didn't warrant further investigation at this time. The email provided no explanation of how the board had reached this conclusion or what analysis they conducted to dismiss documented evidence of potential securities fraud. Now about 79% of you think I'm about to leak information to the media or tip off the SEC anonymously, and you're wrong. Subscribe right now, because what actually happens is that securities fraud doesn't stop just because a board decides not to investigate it, and when federal agencies eventually discover violations that companies knew about and ignored, the consequences are catastrophic. After receiving the board's dismissal on October 12, I had decisions to make. I could accept the board's decision and hope nothing bad happened. I could resign and walk away from a situation where I'd done my job but had been ignored. Or I could report the matter externally to securities regulators who had authority to investigate regardless of what Horizon's board wanted. The Dodd-Frank Act, passed after the 2008 financial crisis, established a whistleblower program at the SEC specifically designed to encourage reporting of securities violations. The program provided protections for employees who reported suspected violations to the SEC, including anti-retaliation provisions and potential monetary awards if the SEC's investigation led to sanctions exceeding $1 million. On October 18, 2023, I submitted a detailed whistleblower tip to the SEC through their online portal. I provided all the evidence I'd compiled, trading records, timeline analysis, communication patterns, statistical analysis, and documentation showing I'd reported internally to Horizon's board and had been dismissed. I also identified specific securities laws I believed were being violated and specific companies where insider trading appeared to have occurred. The SEC's whistleblower program operates confidentially. The agency doesn't disclose who submitted tips, and companies don't receive notification that tips have been filed about them. The SEC reviews submitted tips, investigates those that appear credible, and takes enforcement action when investigations confirm violations. After submitting my SEC tip, I continued working at Horizon Financial. Marcus Sterling continued managing client accounts and executing trades. The board's decision to ignore my internal report meant business operations continued normally as if no compliance concerns existed. But I knew that somewhere in the SEC's enforcement division, analysts were reviewing my tip and beginning their own investigation into Marcus's trading patterns. Over the next 4 months, November 2023 through February 2024, Marcus continued generating strong returns for his clients. He was featured in a Financial Times article in December about top-performing wealth managers. Richard Hoffman mentioned Marcus in earnings calls as an example of Horizon's investment talent. Marcus's client assets grew from $600 million to $647 million as new clients sought access to his proven track record. I continued monitoring Marcus's trading activity through my normal compliance surveillance role. The suspicious patterns continued. In November, Marcus had bought shares in a pharmaceutical company 3 weeks before the company announced a major FDA approval that caused the stock to jump 23%. In January, Marcus had sold positions in a tech company 2 weeks before the company announced disappointing earnings that caused the stock to drop 31%. The same pattern of uncannily well-timed trades that had triggered my original investigation. On February 27, 2024, I received a call from an attorney at the SEC's Division of Enforcement. The attorney, Lisa Park, identified herself and explained that the SEC was conducting an investigation into trading activity at Horizon Financial and needed to interview me as part of that investigation. Lisa asked whether I'd be willing to meet with SEC investigators to discuss my observations of trading patterns and compliance procedures at Horizon. I agreed to the interview. On March 12, 2024, I met with 2 SEC investigators at their New York office. The interview lasted 4 hours. They asked detailed questions about Marcus's trading patterns, about Horizon's information barrier policies, about my internal investigation findings, and about the board's response to my whistleblower report. They asked me to walk through specific trades and explain how I'd identified them as suspicious. They asked about communications between Marcus and investment banking personnel. Most significantly, they told me that their investigation had expanded beyond the evidence I'd provided. They'd subpoenaed records from multiple brokerage firms, had interviewed employees at companies where suspicious trades had occurred, and had identified additional instances of potential insider trading beyond the 17 I'd documented. They'd also discovered that Marcus had been sharing inside information with 3 other portfolio managers at Horizon who'd been making similar suspicious trades in their own client accounts. On April 8, 2024, federal agents executed search warrants at Horizon Financial's offices in Stamford. They seized trading records, email servers, and personal devices from Marcus Sterling and 3 other portfolio managers. They interviewed dozens of Horizon employees. The FBI had joined the investigation alongside the SEC because insider trading is both a securities law violation and a federal crime. The raids made news immediately. Horizon's stock price dropped 18% in one day on reports that the firm was under federal investigation for insider trading. Clients began withdrawing assets. Richard Hoffman issued a statement saying Horizon was cooperating fully with authorities and had zero tolerance for regulatory violations. On April 15, the board called an emergency meeting to understand what was happening. They asked David Mitchell to brief them on the investigation. David explained that federal agencies were investigating Marcus Sterling and potentially others for insider trading based on a pattern of trades using material non-public information. The board asked whether there had been any prior warning about potential problems with Marcus's trading. David pulled out my September 2023 whistleblower report and the October 5 board presentation. Elena Rodriguez documented these exact concerns 8 months ago. She presented detailed evidence to this board. The board decided not to investigate. Gerald Thompson protested, "We didn't have all this information 8 months ago." Elena presented some statistical analysis and speculation. David responded, Elena presented documented evidence of 17 suspicious trades with timeline correlations and communication patterns. The federal investigation has now found additional trades using the same methods. Elena was right. On May 3, 2024, the SEC filed charges against Marcus Sterling, 3 other Horizon portfolio managers, and 2 Horizon investment bankers alleging an insider trading scheme that had generated illegal profits of approximately $14 million over 3 years. The SEC's complaint detailed how the investment bankers had shared material non-public information about their corporate clients with portfolio managers who used that information to trade in client accounts ahead of public announcements. The SEC also filed charges against Horizon Financial Services as a firm, alleging failure to maintain adequate information barriers, failure to supervise registered representatives, and failure to investigate known red flags. The SEC's complaint specifically referenced that Horizon's compliance department had identified suspicious patterns and had reported them to the board, but that the board had declined to investigate. On May 10, federal prosecutors announced criminal charges against Marcus Sterling and the 2 investment bankers who'd provided inside information. The charges included securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. If convicted, Marcus faced up to 25 years in prison and millions in fines. The legal and financial fallout was immediate and severe. Horizon's clients withdrew over $1.8 billion in assets during May and June as institutional investors and high-net-worth individuals fled a firm that had failed to prevent insider trading. Horizon's market value dropped 54% as investors priced in the costs of regulatory sanctions, legal fees, and lost business. Richard Hoffman and Amanda Chen both resigned under board pressure. On July 18, 2024, Horizon Financial settled with the SEC for $87 million in penalties and disgorgement of ill-gotten gains. The settlement required Horizon to implement comprehensive compliance reforms, retain an independent compliance monitor for 3 years, and improve information barriers between divisions. The settlement also included findings that Horizon's board had been aware of potential insider trading red flags and had failed to investigate, which the SEC characterized as willful blindness to securities violations. On July 22, Horizon's board held another emergency meeting. They terminated Gerald Thompson as chairman and accepted the resignations of 3 other board members who'd voted against investigating Marcus Sterling after my whistleblower presentation. They appointed Patricia Nguyen, the only board member who'd asked substantive questions about my evidence, as interim chairwoman. On July 25, Patricia called me to her office. "Elena, I've reviewed everything that happened. You identified serious violations, you documented them thoroughly, you reported them to the board through proper channels, and you were ignored. Then you did what you were legally obligated to do, you reported to the SEC. If the board had listened to you in October, we could have investigated internally, stopped the violations, and potentially avoided most of this disaster. Instead, we ignored you, the violations continued, and the SEC discovered everything anyway but worse." Patricia offered me a new role, Senior Vice President of Compliance and Ethics, reporting directly to the CEO, with full authority over all compliance functions and explicit board-level reporting duties for any significant compliance concerns. My salary increased from $123,000 to $215,000, a 75% increase. I would also receive a substantial portion of the SEC Whistleblower Award that would eventually be paid when the case was fully resolved. The SEC Whistleblower Program provides awards between 10% and 30% of monetary sanctions exceeding $1 million when whistleblower information leads to successful enforcement. Horizon's $87 million settlement plus the ongoing criminal cases against Marcus and others would likely result in total sanctions exceeding $100 million. My whistleblower award could potentially be $10 to $30 million, paid by the SEC several years after cases were fully concluded. In September 2024, I ran into Gerald Thompson at a compliance conference. He'd left Horizon's board and was no longer serving on any corporate boards. He saw me and approached with obvious discomfort. "Elena, I heard about your promotion. Congratulations." I looked at him directly. "I got promoted because I did my job correctly. I identified securities violations, I documented them, I reported them, and when the board ignored them, I reported to the SEC as required by law. You got removed from the board because you received detailed evidence of insider trading and decided not to investigate because Marcus Sterling was too profitable to question." Gerald tried to defend his decision. "The board reviewed your report and made a reasonable business judgment that the evidence didn't warrant a disruptive investigation." I responded firmly, "Securities fraud isn't a reasonable business judgment situation. When your compliance officer presents documented evidence of illegal trading patterns, your obligation is to investigate immediately regardless of who's being investigated or how profitable they are. You chose to protect Marcus because investigating him would have been inconvenient. The SEC investigated anyway, found exactly what I'd documented plus additional violations you would have discovered if you'd bothered to look, and Horizon paid $87 million in sanctions plus lost $1.8 billion in client assets. That's not reasonable business judgment. That's willful blindness that destroyed shareholder value to protect a criminal." Gerald walked away without responding. "Thanks for staying through this entire story. Everyone who's ever reported serious compliance violations through proper internal channels only to be dismissed by leadership who didn't want to discover problems, or who faced retaliation for raising concerns that later proved absolutely correct. If this resonated with you, if you've been a whistleblower who was ignored internally before being proven right by external investigation, subscribe and share your story. These workplace tales remind us that compliance obligations can't be dismissed by business convenience, that federal regulators will eventually discover violations regardless of whether boards want to investigate them, and that companies that ignore whistleblower warnings learn the most expensive lessons when those same concerns bring federal agents with search warrants.